Welcome back to They Did What? Your source for the internet's craziest, most entertaining stories, where I go with them, analyze them, and most certainly make fun of them. Today, I'm going to be doing part 5 of the ongoing crazy story, which is titled, I Ditched My Bride on Our Honeymoon After I Saw Her Cheating. 5 months later, she's back and pregnant. And guys, that story, as you have been watching, is, well, quite the interesting one here, and definitely falls into the category crazy, which is why I'm doing it over here. And I'm not going to do a big recap because you guys all are well aware what was going on in the story, where things left off. And if you don't know what the heck I'm talking about because you just clicked on this video, go back and watch the other episodes. They're definitely entertaining. And you'll be able to catch up and continue on here. So on that basis, I'm just going to continue on where things left off and with this guy's update here. And remember, guys, by the way, this is the guy who wrote into me, to me, and I think from other channel, but I thought it was so good and more appropriate for here. That's why I'm doing it over here. It says, hello, SSM. Thanks again for reading our story on your They Did What channel. My dad, Alex, Uncle Jake, and I appreciate the feedback from you and your community of viewers. It really has helped us get through all this. People asked for an update, so here it is. As you'll see, we need more advice from you and your audience. Well, given the situation in this update, I can certainly see why. The best place to start this update is a brief summary. My wife Jill and I, both 24, were married in June 2023, and our honeymoon was on a French island in the Caribbean, Guadalupe Island. We met an American woman working at the resort where we stayed. Her name is Jane. I found Jill and Jane having sex, and I left Jill on the island and returned home. That was a boss move, my man. Jill came home pregnant in November, 5 months later. DNA has confirmed the son she is carrying is mine. I haven't talked to her since. She called me with the DNA results after she returned in November. Jill's due date is in February. Our divorce is in progress. Or in process. My fraternal twin, but only half-sister Amy, is married to my friend Alex. Both are also 24 years old. They have a son together. My mother sent Amy on a rescue mission last September to bring Jill back from the Caribbean. Amy came home pregnant. Yeah, we all remember that part. What a coincidence. Some random guy on the beach. Unless it's about his son, Alex refused to have anything to do with her until the unborn daughter, who is not his. Amy is due in June. Their divorce is in process. What a freaking mess. My mother and father have been married for nearly 30 years, and my father demanded a DNA test from me and my sister. I am my father's biological son. My fraternal twin Amy is not my father's biological daughter. That's just crazy. I believe you, but God almighty. Your mom was like a cat that hooked up with all the dudes, with all the male cats in the neighborhood. Fraternal twins can be fathered by different men. Swimmers from 2 different men link with 2 different eggs. 2 pregnancies result in different fathers. Rare, but it does happen. Again, your mom's a fucking cat. It happened to us. People in the comments provide the name for this circumstance. My mother has kept a diary in a yearly notebook since she was a girl. My father read her 2023 diary and found that my mother had a current lover, her vice principal, a married man of 15 years, her junior. So he's looking for some senior action, huh? My father refuses to talk to my mother about anything. I'm in the middleman between them. Their divorce is also in process. My father forced my mother to tell him my father is not her biological father. He also made my mother call her vice principal's wife to confess my mother's affair with the husband. When they started school again after Christmas break, my mother called me to tell me that the vice principal had resigned, no longer works at her school. Sodom and Gomorrah 2.0, guys. The vice principal and his wife are divorcing. My mother told me she's glad he's gone. My father doesn't have to worry about him anymore, or anyone else. She wanted me to tell the father. When I told him, my father shrugged and said, who cares? My Uncle Jake, my mother's brother, has been a stalwart supporter of my father, Alex, and me. For my uncle, there's no real choice for any of us. Once a cheater, always a cheater. Listen to your uncle. He knows what he's talking about. Once the trust is gone, so is the marriage. My uncle is the one who turned us to SSM. We all watch your videos now. All of us have learned a lot from you and your commentary and from all the comments of your viewers. We are all strengthened by your support. Thank you very much. Guys, my pleasure. And shout out to the uncle for turning you guys on to my channel. It says here, Jill returned home in November pregnant. Shortly after her return, I got a call from Uncle Jake. His sister, my mother, called him insisting that he put Jill on the company health insurance. Why should he do that? Jill had good insurance as a public school teacher, but she lost that insurance when she didn't show up to teach this past fall semester. Yeah, that kind of happens. If you don't show up at your job, you tend to not get paid and get fired, and you don't get the insurance. That's how it works out. Too busy loving her girlfriend in Guadalupe. My uncle owns a large construction company. I work in his accounting department. Jill is my wife, so we can easily add her to my health insurance. Nah. My uncle offers pretty good group health insurance to his employees. Most of the expenses of her pregnancy and delivery would be covered. When my uncle called me, he suggested we add Jill to my policy. She'll get the best care possible. My soon-to-be-born son will also get the best care. I agreed and we added her, better than me paying for anything. Well, fuck her, but you want your boy to be okay, because you know obviously through the test that the child she's carrying is your son. So in that situation, okay, but if it was just for her, the hell with her. My uncle told me that's probably why Jill returned from Guadalupe. Pregnancies and births are very expensive. She had no insurance in Guadalupe, so she came home to get on my insurance. He's glad she did for the sake of my son, but he also warned me that once Jill doesn't need the insurance, she won't need me. My father read my mother's diary from the year my sister and I were conceived, and also the one in 2023. But my father wants to read the rest of the diaries. That's going to take a long time. He doesn't need to. This is an at-fault state. The DNA test proved my sister is not my father's child. He has proof of her affair with her vice principal from the 2023 diary. That's more than enough to prove infidelity for his divorce, but he wants to read all her diaries. On the one hand, I get it. On the other hand, it's like, you got all the evidence you need. Why torture yourself? She's a liar. She's a cheater. She's a manipulator. She's a piece of crap. But it's his life. I told him it's an exercise. It's an exercise of self-torture. What the hell's the point? He says he lived with someone he loved her but didn't know for 30 years. He wants to find out who his wife really is. I think her actions have shown who she is and how he could be deceived by someone for so long. I've known Jill for 20 years. We've been intimate since high school, over 6 years. I'm sympathetic to anyone who is curious about someone he's known for years but who turns out to be a complete stranger. Anyway, he wants her diaries. My father won't talk to my mom. I'm supposed to get the diaries and deliver them to my father. My mother says absolutely not. She thinks my dad has already seen enough. I guess there's more to find out about my mother's affairs. What a surprise. Pandora's box, that's what it is. My father wants to sell the house he lived in and raise my sister. He raised my sister and me. Jill also spent a lot of time growing up in that house. My mother wants to hold on to the house so she can keep Amy and Jill and the grandchild close. The three wives, my mother and Jill and Amy, along with Alex and Amy's son, are living in that house together. I'd say, okay, well then fine. You're going to buy me out for my share of the house. Period. I told my mother I would talk to my father about her keeping the house if she would give me her diaries. I also told her that things can't get worse between her and my father. Things can always get worse. She should do as he asks and let him read the diaries. Maybe my father will believe my mother actually cares about him, actually cares about what he wants, and she finally agreed. There's really nothing more for her to lose. Well, be careful what you wish for with the diaries, Dad. I told my father about her wanting to keep the house. He said he knows she wants the house. Not going to happen. It'll be sold as part of the divorce settlement. But I did what I promised my mother and talked to my father about the house. I didn't promise to convince him of anything. My mother and I worked out a time for me to pick up her diaries, a time my mother assured me when Jill will not be there. So she can deliver the diaries. Doesn't mean she has to deliver all the pages in the diaries. You can be like, rip. It's going to be like, you see these, pictures of like these declassified documents or whatever, and you see like all these lines through everything. She'll deliver the books, but you're going to see lines through all this information or pages torn out. It says here, I haven't seen Jill since she showed up at my door when she returned in November. I read at the house to find a very pregnant Jill waiting for me. Jill told me she wanted to talk and she wanted to explain. They always want to explain. There was no use in leaving and coming back another time for the notebooks. Jill will be there then too. I decided to grab the half-dozen boxes of diary notebooks and leave as quickly as I could. I told Jill I didn't need an explanation, but while I get the boxes, Jill waddled after me. Of course she did. Here's what Jill told me. Okay, here we go. Everybody get their bullshit detectors ready to go. Jane was obviously interested in Jill, but Jill didn't realize Jane was gay. Really? You didn't realize that? I don't know. Some girl-on-girl loving kind of tells me that. Jill thought Jane was lonely or just interested in befriending and hanging out with a fellow American her age. Jane is a girly girl, petite and very pretty and not at all butch. When Jane offered to give Jill a massage, Jill didn't think it was a big deal. Yeah, sure. I'm sure all the girls out there that have girlfriends just give each other massages here and there, and do them naked and make out and all that. That's just being a friend. Please. But it turned into something way more than massage. She blamed Jane for taking advantage of her and told Jane to leave her alone. Takes two to tango. But Jill was very troubled about what happened. Jill said she knows she isn't gay. If it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck and has girl-on-girl action like a girl-on-girl duck, it's a duck. Whatever she says to me, whenever she sees me, she wants to jump my bones. She's ready to do me right now, 8 months pregnant. No thanks. I don't need to invade my son's space. She looked at me optimistically. I was putting a box in my truck and didn't respond. Jill continued, she's never been interested in women, but she was very attracted to Jane. So she's now suddenly bi. Jill said she didn't understand what was going on with her. She didn't understand her fascination with Jane. She was confused and brooded about it for days. They're always confused. What a steaming pile of crap. Did I remember the naked gal we saw with the two guys at the nude beach? She's very good looking, but Jill was not attracted to her at all. It was just Jane that Jill was drawn to. Jill said she was relieved. She wasn't interested in women, just Jane. She got into her head that if she spent time with Jane, the feelings that she had for Jane would burn themselves out. She went with Jane on her boat for 2 days. The feelings didn't burn themselves out. She met Jane at the beach bonfire. The feelings for Jane were still there. Regardless of Jane, Jill was preparing to leave with me when it was time to return home. We would have a wonderful life together. Jane would just remain Jill's fond memory from our honeymoon. Who gives a shit? You still freaking cheated on me. End of story. I don't care if you're not into gals. Your actions prove otherwise. And that's cheating. End of story. When Jill returned to the room after meeting Jane at the beach bonfire, she found me and my stuff gone. She realized I must have discovered her and Jane together and left. Duh. Nice one, Sherlock. She tried to reach me, but my cell phone was off and I blocked her. She called Amy and explained what happened. Amy told her to hold tight. Amy and my mother would talk to me and get me to take her back. They did talk to me and I wanted to annul our marriage. Amy suggested that Jill let me cool off. Amy and my mother will convince me that Jill's frolic with Jane meant nothing. It was just with a woman. Not a man, no big deal. Give it a couple days and I'll begin to miss Jill. I'll forgive her, then Jill can return home to our life together. Yeah, it's nice to see that with your mom and your sister, your girlfriend's more important to them than you. That did not happen. Jill told me not returning immediately was a huge mistake, but she was still waiting for her thing with Jane, whatever it was, to flame out. So she listened to Amy and stayed in the Caribbean. Bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. What happened was she was 5 months pregnant at that point or something like that. No, even more, I guess. And she's going to need medical treatment and all that, prepping for the baby. And the other one's not going to be able to provide, so she came back because she needs your help. That's why. If she wasn't pregnant, she wouldn't come back. Or until her girlfriend kicked her out. As time passed, it became harder and harder to return and face me. Well, no kidding, with a big bump on her belly. She kept putting it off. When Amy arrived in September, Amy just wanted to have a good time. Jane and Jill showed her the island and introduced her to the beach night life. Translation, Sodom and Gomorrah 2.0 on the beach. But Amy told Jill was still angry and wanted nothing to do with Jill. Jill told Amy, Amy and our mother are working on me. I'll come to my senses sooner or later, according to her. But Jill's desire for Jane was still there. She didn't think it was fair to me to have Jane hanging out over our heads. She listened to Amy and decided to stay in the Caribbean, another big mistake. So now she can blame her staying longer on your sister. There's always someone to blame in this situation here. By October, Jill's desire for Jane finally faded. They were no longer intimate, just friends. So Jill came home hoping to convince me that her foolishness was past. So if they weren't just friends and there was no attraction, if the fire didn't burn out between those two, then she would have stayed. She loves me. She has loved me since she was 12 years old, probably before she was 12. She never loved Jane or anyone else. Jane was an aberration. Jill was not gay or bi. It will never happen again. I don't care if it never happens again. We're done. Jill and I and our son can be a happy family. She will do anything I want to make it right. I doubt that. We can have a wonderful family, wonderful life together, and we always plan, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's what it all is, blah, blah, blah. I told her I was getting reports on her pregnancy and the baby. Everything seemed fine. How could that be if Jill was drinking and getting high at the beach parties? Was she pregnant? Behavior like that adversely affects the baby. Jill said she knew she was pregnant when we got married. She was going to surprise me about the baby on our honeymoon. Yeah, well, this guy got a whole different surprise. But the problem was Jane came up and I left for home before she could tell me she was pregnant. Again, it's all Jane's fault. Jill didn't drink at all while she and I were together on the honeymoon. Since Jill is not a big drinker, I didn't think anything of it. She said she had not had hard liquor or drugs since she got pregnant. She and Jane stopped hanging out around the beach people almost as soon as I left. That got old real fast. She found a great OBGYN in Guadalupe. She took good care of herself. She and the baby could not have been in better shape. We're going to have the perfect son. Oh, for goodness sake. This is all while she's following him around. He's loading up mom's horror diaries into the freaking car. When Amy visited in September, Amy spent her nights with the people around the bonfire. Jill and Amy hit the beach during the day, but Amy was on her own at night. She was as wild as she was in college. Sitting in the sun the next day, Amy would tell Jill about her adventures on the beach the night before. No surprise at all, Amy got pregnant. More surprising is that Amy didn't get an STD. I don't know, maybe she has enough things crawling around inside of her that she now can't get any STDs because she's had enough of them in her. I don't know. Amy and my mother knew Jill was pregnant right after our return from Guadalupe last June. Jill told them, but not me. They decided to keep that from me. Thanks, Mom and Sister. I would not believe that it is my child and make anything worse. They would tell me about Jill's pregnancy when they could prove it was mine. And they were all sure the baby was my child. Well, of course they were convinced that. Jill said she's not been with another man since we got together in high school. Sure. Not in high school, not in college, not since she and I were first together. Her thing with Jane is over and done. She doesn't want anyone but me. Jane was a mistake. And it won't happen again. Please, please, please forgive her. Let's try again, she says. Our baby deserves a family. I just kept carrying boxes to my truck while tagging along after me and talked. Man, she got all this out while you were hauling the horror boxes back and forth. Jill asked if I plan to be with her in the delivery room. No. Fathers are in the delivery room to support the mothers. I have no desire to support Jill, but I'll be at the hospital to meet my son. Bonding with him after his birth is very important. I told Jill the marriage is over. No lies she tells me now are going to change my mind. And I don't believe anything she says. I married a fantasy who I completely made up or who she pretended to be. Yeah, that's exactly it. She's who you thought she was, not who she actually is. And she put on a good act, man. It happens to plenty of guys. The fantasy Jill doesn't exist. The real Jill is not someone I want to have anything to do with. I'll be there for my son, but that's in spite of Jill being his mother. Jill started crying and begging me for a second chance. I ignored her and continued to load the boxes. How many fucking boxes are here to get this whole thing out of her? I get you're giving the details and she's talking a mile a minute here. Jill continued to plead with me. When I finished and drove away, Jill was in the street wailing with my mother trying to comfort her. No, I'm sure that was funny to watch. Jane, Jill's lover, knocked on my mother's front door a few days later. Oh, look who's here from Guadalupe. After my father had a chance to read my mother's diaries, I asked him what he found out. Oh, God. He told me she's had affairs with multiple men over the years. She was never faithful and describes in detail her interaction with her lovers. It's like reading the diary of a silly teenager. She meets someone who comes on to her. It's exciting and thrilling. He gives her all the attention she craves. She believes she's in love with him. They begin an S-word relationship. She debates with herself about leaving my father to be with him. But then the excitement begins to wear off. He's not as attentive as he was. It's no longer as thrilling. Time to remove him onto the next love of her life. Same cycle repeated over and over through the years. That paragraph, what he got from the pattern in all her diaries, pretty much sums up every gal. My father told me the pattern of my mother's affairs became predictable. My mother falls in love with a new guy. Her diary is filled with descriptions of her emotions, her love for him. Then she begins to write less about her emotions and more about her escort activities. Very detailed. Your poor dad. Oh my God, but you know what? He's the one that wanted to read all this shit. She compares this guy to past guys. The excitement begins to disappear. My mother becomes bored. Doesn't love the guy anymore. Blah, blah, blah. On to the next one. Maybe starts with a new guy before she ends it with the current guy. That's usually how it works. Even more exciting, cheating on her husband and her boyfriend with a new lover. All the men, including my dad, ultimately mean nothing to her. No lasting emotional connection. Just the need for attention and the delights of illicit SCX. What I tell you, attention and validation, gentlemen. Sneaking around my father's bag added to the thrill, and my father was the perfect loving dope. I asked my father if she ever planned to leave him. And he said early on in their marriage, he writes about suggesting to one of her lovers that they move in together. She should leave my father and her 2 young children for him. The guy told my mother that they didn't have that sort of relationship. My mother misunderstood his intentions. He was happily married and had no interest in leaving his wife or my mother. He broke it off with my mother. Too needy. My mother was heartbroken but never asked another guy to turn their affair into something permanent. At least there's nothing more in her diaries about leaving my father. They all just petered out sooner or later, after the excitement began to fade. I said that my father told me he went through my mother's cell phone and found nothing. How was that possible? My father said my mother always insisted they keep a landline and later the internet equivalent of a landline. He never looked at the landline usage, and she never received a suspicious call while he was around. Looking back, he remembers lots of wrong numbers and hang-ups, but he was clueless until the defense of Jill and Amy's infidelity raised his suspicions. And after year and year communities unanimous in telling him that he should be suspicious. Also, my dad told me that the diaries reveal that my sister Amy knew about my mom's boyfriends. Oh my God. She didn't care. She didn't care. The dad was cheating. The mother was cheating. When she was in her teens, Amy bumped into my mother when my mother was on a date. My mother asked my sister to keep her secret, and my sister did. She never told my father that our mother was seeing other men. The diaries describe discussions between my sister and my mother about the need for her to spice up her life by going outside the marriage. My sister seemed to buy into that. My father stopped talking to my sister. He feels betrayed by her too. I wouldn't talk to her either. And then your sister is a big, giant, lying, manipulative, sneaky cheater just like your mother. Acorn doesn't fall far from the tree. Dude, I'm sorry you're in such a fucked up family. Amy's husband, Alex, does not talk to her unless it's about their son. He'll support his son, but not Amy, and not the daughter Amy is carrying. There is no chance of reconciliation. Good, Alex. Stick to the plan. When he calls the plan for time for his son, and Amy starts to explain her past cheating, he hangs up on her. Alex no longer talks to my mother. He says he's had it with all the females in my family. I wish I could do the same, though. I can stop Amy and my mother from talking about how much Jill loves me and wants me back. I can stop Amy's attempts to get me to intercede for her with Alex, or my mother's attempts to get me to intercede for her and my father. But I don't feel as though I can cut them off entirely. And I get information about Jill's pregnancy from my mother. My mother is the intermediary between Jill and me, like I am between her and my father. Well, look, if for that purpose you don't have to talk to freaking Jill about the pregnancy and you go through the mom, so be it for now. But once the child's born, you have to deal with your fucking mom anymore. Once Jane arrived at my mother's, Jane's now here, Amy and my mother became the only source for what Jill was thinking. Was she planning to take off with my son? Was she going to give birth, dump my son, and leave with Jane? So I put up with all their excuses and their attempts to get me to reconcile with Jill. I figured it was worth listening to their nonsense if I got some advance warning about what Jill was planning with Jane about my son. Anyway, because your soon-to-be ex is pregnant and Jane's now here, and let's just see those feelings come rushing back. And what if they got on a plane and she's pregnant, and disappeared? Well, we're going to get to that. I was in a meeting when my mother called to tell me Jane, Jill's lover, arrived from Guadalupe. Her voice message was that I better get over to her place and get my wife. You can see how this seems like it's all planned out. Jill's friend Jane showed up just at her house. Jane says she's here to help with Jill through the birth. She'll be Jill's birth coach since I refuse to be in the delivery room. Does Jane have a lot of experience in this? She has a lot of experience looking at lady parts. I don't know if she has experience in childbirth. My mother is worried that Jill is so fragile from my rejection that Jane might convince her to return to the Caribbean and take our son with them after he's born. My mother reminded me that Jill has talked before about leaving in the Caribbean with my son. Well, I like to know what the legal issues there of her taking your boy away from you out of the country in some other place. But being pregnant, that could be a different situation. My mother told me last December that she and Jill argued about Jill returning to Guadalupe with our son after he's born. I asked my lawyer if she could take our newborn out of the country without my permission, and here's what he told me. I'll try to be brief. You need a passport to enter a foreign country. Guadalupe is part of France. Jill and I had to get passports for our honeymoon. A newborn baby also needs a passport to enter a foreign country. A newborn baby also needs a passport to enter. I read that part. Just like anybody else. To get my son a passport, Jill either has to prove that she has sole custody of my son, or we both have to sign a passport application. Okay, but if she's pregnant, that's a different ballgame. My name will be listed as father on the birth certificate, and she needs to prove his birth certificate to get him a passport. She can't show that she has sole custody. I'm not signing any passport applications for my son. She's not getting him a passport. She's not taking my son to Guadalupe. But Jill needs a passport to take my son out of the country only after he's born, not while she's pregnant. There's nothing to stop a pregnant woman from traveling anywhere she can legally go, as long as she has the appropriate documents for herself. Jill can enter Guadalupe pregnant with our son and give birth to him there. I can't stop her without a court order. Get the fucking court order. Does she have the proper documents? We were able to travel to Guadalupe on our honeymoon without a visa because we were only staying for 2 weeks. All EU countries, including France, have a 90 to 180 day rule for visas. If you plan to be in the EU country less than 3 months, in any 6-month period, you don't need a visa. Any stay longer than 3 months requires a visa. To get a visa, you also have to show that you can support yourself. It won't be a burden to the foreign government while in the EU country. Oh, how interesting. But last time I checked, I think many of people are flooding into the EU countries and can't support themselves, as I've read and been told. Jill stayed in Guadalupe for 5 months before returning to the USA. She was either staying there illegally after 3 months, or she came back to the US to get a visa and then return to Guadalupe. I don't think she was doing Plan B. She may have just stayed illegally. Evidently, France can be pretty lax about enforcing some visa requirements. There's a fucking surprise. Especially in areas that live off tourism from foreign tourists. They probably didn't try to track Jill down to export her. Or you mean deport her. But returning to Guadalupe now, if she was there illegally, will be a problem. If she doesn't already have a visa, she'll need to get one. That takes at least 2 weeks. If she did get a visa at some point, she could leave for Guadalupe, pregnant with my son today. To get a court order to stop her, I have to prove to a judge I'm the father. No problem. I then have to show her that leaving the country prevents me from having contact with my son. No problem. The judge can then order her to remain in the country. A problem. By the time we get to before the judge, my son could be born and being raised by Jill and Jane in Guadalupe. It would be a nightmare trying to get him back to the US of A. When Jane arrived, I told my attorney to get started on the court order to keep Jill from leaving the country with my unborn son. God, dude. The problems never stop, huh? Jane would know about passport and visa requirements for Guadalupe, but most people don't know that babies also need passports and visas. Maybe Jane and Jill are waiting for my son to be born before whisking him off to the Caribbean. I hope that's their plan. Easy to stop that. What if they decide to go back to Guadalupe before Jill gives birth? Hard to stop that. When Jane arrived here, Jill's due date was in about 4 weeks, the middle of February. As pregnant as she was, it would be tough being in the air for hours flying to Guadalupe. But is it possible? How much does Jill want to be with Jane and my son in the Caribbean? And does she have a visa? Well, remember, you're thinking about this logically. She's going to be thinking about this emotionally. And all the crap that she's have to go through and everything, she may not care because the emotions are taking over here. My mom must be freaking out the possibility that Jill will take my son to Guadalupe. Jill and my mother have already argued over that. I call my mom back about her message that Jane has arrived. After saying hello, she went on a rant. I'll summarize. Jane is here to convince Jill to go back with her. Jane wants Jill for herself in Guadalupe. They're sleeping in the same room. Uh-oh. We know what happened the last time they did that. She's sure Jane is trying to seduce Jill. She's afraid to throw Jane out of the house because Jill will leave with her. Jill and Jane will be alone together. That's exactly what Jane wants. If I don't come and get Jill right now, I'll lose her and my son to Jane. I'll never see my son again. I can't let that happen. The only solution is for Jill and me to reconcile. This is your mother's plan. Jill wants to be with me, not with Jane. But I can't leave Jill alone with Jane. I've got to hurry over there and pick up Jill before it's too late. She'll tell Jill right now to pack up, that I'm on the way to get her. How soon can I get there? And that is where I'm going to wrap up this part 5, and I'll do part 6 in a couple hours. But I smell bullshit. I think the mother here, this is her ultimate plan. Bring Jane in the picture. She probably paid for her to come there. And then make you so worried that Jane's going to whisk her away. And the mom's calling you with the perfect solution to the problem. And alas, you get back with Jill, mom's happy, and everybody lives happily ever after. Nah, I smell BS. But we will continue on a little bit later on to see if this is BS, how this whole thing is handled, etc., etc., etc. Stay tuned.